Hello viewers, thank you for joining Alpha One Canada's 2015 Virtual Education Summit. My name is Duncan Lamb and I'm your host. We're very happy and grateful to have our speaker here today, Dr. Robert Sandhaus from National Jewish Health in Denver, Colorado. Dr. Sandhaus will be speaking on the hot topic of stem cells. He'll give us a basic understanding of stem cells and also some facts about stem cells research, and also how to detect frauds. Dr. Sandhaus, do you mind saying a few words to our viewers before we begin? Maybe share with us your experience and areas of expertise?
No, I'd love to. Sure. I am a pulmonologist by training. I got into the area of alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency in the early 1970s. Doing work on how emphysema is caused, and from there moved into Alpha-1. Currently, I'm the medical director of the Alpha-1 Foundation and AlphaNet, as well as a professor of medicine here at National Jewish Health in Denver. And my practice is limited exclusively to patients with alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sandhaus. Well, like me, I'm sure our viewers are anxious to hear more about stem cells and stem cells research. So let's proceed to today's featured presentation.
Hello, this is Sandy Sandhaus. I have the pleasure today of talking to you about stem cells, promise or fraud. The impetus for preparing this presentation is a combination of the great promise that stem cells hold for improving a number of diseases, including lung disease and liver disease, as well as the nefarious practice of taking advantage of people with severe diseases using unproven and potentially dangerous therapies. And so I'm going to try to handle both aspects of stem cell therapy and stem cell research in this single talk. What we're going to try to cover today starts with the very basics of what stem cells are and why is the potential for stem cell therapy exciting. What's the current promise of stem cell therapies, and how these promises have been turned into fraudulent claims and practices for potential stem cell therapies. And finally, I will hope to end on a discussion of how you can tell the difference between real research and for-profit research, and how you can tell the difference between a reasonable or medically accepted stem cell therapy and one that's really designed to take your money and run. So first, what are stem cells? Officially, stem cells have an even longer name, pluripotent stem cells. Pluripotent stem cells, or stem cells for short, are cells that can divide and become virtually any cell type in the body. As you know, the body is made up of epidermal cells, skin cells, liver cells, muscle cells, cardiac muscle cells, 19 different cell types in the lung, etc., etc. And they all originated from one cell, the fertilized egg. So the fertilized egg is the ultimate example of a pluripotent stem cell, a cell that can become any cell type in the body by dividing and changing into the cell type that it's trying to create. In fact, in the early embryo, virtually every cell in the early embryo is pluripotent, presumably this is a defense mechanism in case there's injury to a cell in the embryo that was destined to become, say, a nerve cell. Another cell can step up if that cell has been injured or dies and take the place of that soon-to-be nerve cell. Early on, the first stem cells that were identified were stem cells that were derived from embryonic cells, cells from an embryo, usually an embryo from someone that had been that had gotten an abortion. And these stem cells have garnered the name, therefore, embryonic stem cells. Embryonic stem cells are the most manipulable kinds of stem cells. They can really become any type of cell in the body. But there are ethical issues regarding using embryonic stem cells. The interesting thing is that as the embryo matures and then becomes a fetus and a living human being, that even in the adult human body, there are stem cells that persist in most organs, although in smaller numbers than there are mature cells. And presumably those cells are there to repair and replace cells that might be damaged. Because of the ethical issues regarding embryonic stem cells, recent exciting work has found that you can take adult mature cells from various organs and turn them into stem cells by exposing them to a cocktail of various chemicals and agents and hormones that is able to, in the test tube, if you will, in the culture disc, transform them into stem cells that can then be changed to grow in a lab and become any cell that you might want them to be. These iPSCs, as they're called, or induced pluripotent stem cells, have been derived from skin cells, from blood cells, from bone marrow cells, from a variety of sources. And the technology has improved and improved at making these cells more malleable and able to be turned into other cells of the body. In general, instead of calling those embryonic stem cells, we call them induced stem cells or adult induced stem cells. So what's the big deal about stem cells? Well, once you have a stem cell in the lab, they can be treated with other agents in the culture dish or the place where they're growing that can turn them into a chosen cell type. For example, if you have stem cells, either embryonic or induced stem cells, you can grow them in the right medium and turn them into heart cells or liver cells or nerve cells or blood cells or skin cells, and they could potentially be used to repopulate an area of that organ that might have been damaged. So it is possible that these cells could be used to treat diseases of these organs. Another approach is to take a cell that is a stem cell, put it in one of those damaged organs, and see if the milieu of that organ is capable of transforming that stem cell into cells of that organ. And that seems to be a very promising technique as well. So the promise of stem cells in general, regardless of their source, is that they could be used to repair damaged tissue. There's even work going on specifically with alpha-1 lung and liver disease. Focusing on the lung first, a paper has been published where they showed that if you damage the lungs of rodents, in most cases this is by burning the lungs, and then you inject human stem cells into that damaged lung, that the human stem cells repair and replace the damaged cells and reconstitute all the different cell types of the lung in that animal. And you can look at the DNA of the cells that have gone to repair that lung and see that the DNA is actually human DNA in the cells in that rodent that have had their lungs repaired. Another research project that's come to fruition, is that skin cells from several subjects with alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency have been isolated and grown in such a way that they've been turned into stem cells. Then they've had the alpha-1 gene repaired in those stem cells, and then those repaired stem cells have been turned into liver cells in culture. I'll show you a diagram that demonstrates this. This is a diagram from a paper that I wrote for the New England Journal of Medicine. The entire cycle of the proposed work is suggested here. The liver is the target organ for this kind of therapy, but it starts out with skin biopsy that derives some dermal fibroblasts, skin cells, that are obtained from someone with alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency. These cells in culture are then induced to become pluripotent stem cells. These cells are then treated in a way that cuts out the mutant DNA in the alpha-1 gene and substitutes a normal section of gene in that same area, turning the gene into DNA that can code for the normal M protein. The cells are then selected based on which ones are actually producing normal human alpha-1 antitrypsin, and then those cells that were appropriately corrected are grown up as pluripotent stem cells that had been induced. That's what clonally grown means, that you choose a cell and you grow it up if it's the right cell. And then after you've grown up those stem cells, you mature the cells into hepatocytes, liver cells. The goal of this would be to eventually put these corrected liver cells back into the liver of the original donor. No immunosuppression would be necessary because that's actually the individual's own cells. And so they wouldn't reject the cells. You don't need to give any kind of anti-rejection medications. And presumably, these new hepatocytes would populate the liver and cause the liver to synthesize and secrete normal human alpha-1 antitrypsin. All of the steps of this procedure have been completed successfully, except for the last step. And so I'll tell you what. What happened in the actual study was that the gene for alpha-1 was corrected in the derived stem cells from patients with alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency. The corrected cells were grown in culture. The corrected cells were transformed into liver cells, but the newly corrected liver cells were injected into mouse livers. And it was demonstrated that the mouse livers then synthesized normal human alpha-1 antitrypsin and delivered it into the circulation. And the mouse livers were unaffected in a bad way by having those stem cells injected into those livers. And the mouse cells, the human cells injected into the mouse, continued to make alpha-1 antitrypsin, normal human alpha-1 antitrypsin, for as long as the animals were kept alive. Why did they go to mouse livers? Well, because the technology of stem cells is not entirely appropriate yet. There's cautionary notes in the use of stem cells. Stem cells, when grown in culture in the laboratory, acquire mutations of their genes seemingly randomly with each division, with each passage of the cells, as it's called. The longer these cells are grown in culture, the more mutations are accumulated. And some of these mutations have the potential to be what are known as oncogenes. And oncogenes are genes that can cause cancer. So the risk of stem cell therapy is that instead of repairing a damaged organ, it's possible that you could give someone a cancer of that organ. And that would be bad. And so one of the things that was done in the study I previously described is that the genetics of the stem cells converted to hepatocytes were looked at in detail to see if known oncogenes were present. They weren't, But the problem is that there could be unknown oncogenes that you can't screen for. So this is going to take a little more work before we'd be comfortable putting transformed stem cells back into a human subject or a human patient. So that's the promise of stem cell therapy. That's some examples of where we are today in moving stem cell therapy forward. So what is the issue that makes us concerned about stem cell therapy as it's used today? Well, there is essentially stem cell fraud. And perhaps fraud is too strong a word. I don't think that every physician that's involved in some of these for-profit stem cell facilities is evil. Many of those physicians probably believe that their stem cell therapy is providing some benefit. But in fact, there is no objective evidence that these stem cell therapeutic institutes, which are prominent in Europe and the United States and may be prominent in Canada as well, have actually provide a service to patients other than making their wallets lighter. So you can probably improve someone's exercise tolerance by making their wallets lighter. Because of the popular appreciation that stem cells have the potential to repair damaged tissue, and because people with incurable conditions will try anything that might help their condition, especially after finding little help from traditional therapies, stem cell quackery has proliferated throughout the world. The primary goal of these stem cell treatment centers is to enrich the healthcare providers. Let me give you some examples of what these programs look like based on their website. A popular site in the US is the Lung Institute, with the subheading Breathe Easier. Treat lung disease with stem cell therapy, it says. Use your own stem cells to repair damage from lung disease. Stem cells can help repair lungs that are affected by disease. The Lung Institute provides stem cell therapy for COPD, emphysema, pulmonary fibrosis, interstitial lung disease, chronic bronchitis, and other lung diseases. And if you explore this site, you'll find many testimonials from patients who say they've thrown their oxygen away and they can now, run marathons when before they were bedridden. Most of these centers, including this one, require a large upfront payment in order to get started on this therapy. The therapy involves usually drawing a lot of blood from someone, taking that blood back into a laboratory in the facility, and manipulating it supposedly to isolate stem cells from the blood of those individuals, and then injecting those stem cells back in the hopes and the plan that it will repair damaged lung tissue. The fact is, those stem cells are already in the blood, so why aren't they repairing the lungs already? I can say that there are some Mexican stem cell facilities that actually inject these cells, or cells derived from sheep stem cells, directly into the lungs, and this has been a big problem from a safety standpoint in terms of those therapies, and it's certainly to be avoided. Another example here is Genex, COPD stem cell therapy. Its claims aren't as dramatic. It says, can stem cell help treat chronic obstructive pulmonary disease? It doesn't actually answer that question, but it does, again, give lots of testimonials. You've noticed I've pulled down a menu item here that says stem cell therapy studies. And they apparently do studies with stem cells in Alzheimer's disease, autoimmune disease, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, diabetes, multiple sclerosis, osteoarthritis, Parkinson's disease, and rheumatoid arthritis. You can see that it's a nice range of diseases that really doesn't have a traditional medical cure. So if these are really fraudulent, or if they really are taking advantage of patients with these conditions, Why are they allowed to exist? We all have regulatory authorities in our countries that are supposed to protect us from dangerous or misleading treatments. Well, there are a couple of answers to the question of why these still exist. One is regulatory authorities have a lot to do. They have a lot on their plate, and they have not gotten a lot of complaints about safety issues with these centers, and so they don't have it high on their list. When they have taken action and closed these stem cell mills, most of these places simply open up under another name in a different location and with a different website. And so it's kind of like playing whack-a-mole, if you're familiar with that. You knock one down one location and it pops up in another location. This article that I've shown on this slide is from my local newspaper in Denver. It was a front page article entitled "Stem Cell Clinics Go Unchecked. With little government oversight, business booms for treatments that critics say might do nothing." And this is the problem, is that right now, for instance, in the United States, the FDA is still trying to decide if they can regulate these stem cell clinics. Many clinics, like the second website that I showed you, have said that they are actually performing research. Now, the research they perform, they charge a lot of money for. And bioethicists say that charging patients large sums of money to participate in research is unethical and not likely to really be research. One of the largest stem cell centers, according to that Denver Post article, says it's about to publish its first article on the results of their research. And that first article that they're trying to get published is about how safe the therapy is, not about how effective it is. Another group within that article also called these centers that claim to be doing research unauthorized, for-profit human experimentation. This is a problem because there are stem cell therapies that will be going into human trials, and these centers have given that research a bad name. So it's important to try to figure out how you can tell the difference between stem cell research and stem cell work that is promise, and how you can tell which ones are fraudulent. I think the simplest answer to that is that if something sounds too good to be true and you're being charged a lot of money for it, it probably is too good to be true. If you're asked to pay to obtain stem cell therapy, it's likely fraud, especially if you're asked to make a large upfront cash payment, as many of these places do. If the evidence cited on a particular website that's advertising a stem cell research project or stem cell therapy is primarily from testimonials from satisfied patients, it's likely fraudulent. And if any actual scientific articles that are claimed to be cited on the sites are published in Prevention Magazine or other grocery store publications rather than in a medical journal, then it's likely a fraud. So where are stem cells currently being used that are not fraudulent? Well, stem cell therapy is in use today, most prominently using bone marrow-derived stem cells used to treat some bone marrow cancers. You isolate the stem cells that live normally in an adult's bone marrow. You purify them. Then you wipe out the bone marrow of someone with a bone marrow cancer so that all the cells in the bone marrow are dead, and then you repopulate the bone marrow with those stem cells. This is accepted therapy. Has some problems, but in general, it's a very effective therapy. There have been clinical trials using stem cells to treat heart muscle damage during a heart attack. As far as I know, those studies so far have been largely unsuccessful. They have demonstrated some decrease in the size of the area of the heart that remains damaged after someone has survived a heart attack, but it's unclear whether that decrease in size contributes significantly to the patient's survival or quality of life. So to summarize what I've been trying to point out, first of all, someday stem cell therapy may be used to treat a variety of human diseases, including the liver disease and lung disease of alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency. Currently, there are problems with stem cell therapy that will need to be solved before it can be widely tested and used. Don't forget, the human body has naturally occurring stem cells in virtually every organ and circulating in your blood. If stem cells were the remarkable miracle treatment for curing lung disease and curing liver disease that some of these stem cell sites claim, why aren't the stem cells simply doing that on their own when that's what these questionable treatment centers are claiming their blood-derived stem cells are doing? So I hope I've given you both sides of the picture, and that this will help you decide whether what you're doing is real research, whether a product that's released is an effective product, or whether you're being taken to the cleaners to have your wallet lightened. Thanks for listening, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this complex subject.
This concludes today's featured presentation. On behalf of Alpha-1 Canada, I would like to thank Dr. Robert Sandhaus for taking the time to prepare and speak to our viewers. I have to admit, as much as everything I've heard on the news, I did learn a thing or two about stem cells research today from Dr. Sandhaus's presentation. I'm sure our viewers feel the same way and will now be confident enough to dig deeper into the subject. Please be sure to check out the rest of our 2015 Virtual Education Summit featured videos on our website www.alpha1canada.ca. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day.